It began on a quiet Tuesday evening. The sun had just disappeared behind the trees outside her kitchen window. She poured herself a cup of chamomile tea. The scent wrapped around her like a memory, warm, familiar, comforting, and, for the first time in a long while, there was no noise, no phone ringing, no one asking what was for dinner, no conversation filled with tension or unmet expectations. Just silence, and in that silence, something inside her finally let go. There were no fireworks, no grand moment, just the gentle quiet of a woman had given everything for so long, now finally giving something back to herself. It was not sadness, she felt. It was not fear. It was something deeper, something steady, something still. It was peace, the kind of peace that does not arrive with applause, but with breath, and with that breath she began again. Not with a plan, not with a checklist, not to prove anything, but with a quiet truth rising from within her. Her life was still hers, and it was not too late to choose herself. 1 year of giving her name is Ellie Lahner. For most of her life's she gave her time, her energy, her love, her body, her thoughts, and her sleep she gave. As a wife, even on days she felt more like a stranger than a partner. She gave as a mother, pouring everything into her children without ever stopping to ask what was left for her. She gave as a daughter, caring for aging parents while quietly carrying the weight of generations. She gave so much and so often that the act of giving became her identity. People admired her, they said. She was selfless, graceful, patient, strong, but no one ever asked what it cost. They did not see the nights she sat at the edge of her bed, eyes wide open, staring into a darkness that felt heavier than it should. They did not see her in the grocery store holding a list in her hands, but forgetting what she wanted for herself. They did not hear the sound of her sighs when no one else was home, the sighs that were not from tired feet, but from a tired soul. And so she kept giving, because that is what was expected, that is what made her feel needed, even if it did not make her feel seen somewhere along the way. She stopped asking what she wanted, not just for dinner or for the weekend, but for her life. The question felt too big, too far, too foreign. Then one day, without warning, the questions returned. They did not knock politely. They barged in. What do I like? What do I miss? What do I want? She had no answers. Just a stillness that had been waiting beneath a noise. She realized how many years she had been spoken for, how many times she had made herself small so others could feel comfortable, how often she had smiled through discomfort because it was easier than being honest. She could remember every birthday she planned for others, but forgot the last time she celebrated her own. She could recall every doctor appointment for her children, her parents, even her dog, but forgot the last time she went for herself. These realizations did not arrive in anger. They arrived in softness, like a truth that had waited long enough to be seen. She did not blame anyone, not her ex-husband, not her children, not the people who had come and gone. She simply saw herself for the first time in years, not as a role or a responsibility, but as a person, a woman still here, still breathing, still deserving. She did not yet know what was coming next, but she knew this: she could no longer keep giving from a well that had run dry. She needed to return to herself, not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of return, of healing, of remembering. And so the shift began quietly, gently, without announcement. She began choosing herself not in grand declarations, but in small, steady ways. A walk alone, a moment of stillness with her coffee, saying no to things that once drained her, saying yes to nothing at all, just for the joy of rest. And in those choices, something new began to grow. To the break, it did not happen all at once. There was no single moment when everything changed. Instead, it was a quiet unraveling, one thread at a time. It was forgetting what day it was, because every day felt the same. It was standing in the middle of a room and realizing she did not know why she walked in. It was saying, "I am fine." Even when her chest felt tight and her heart felt far away, Eleanor began to notice things she had ignored for years. The way her body carried tension like memory, the way she smiled without feeling anything behind it, the way her laughter had grown quieter, and her words more careful. People still called her strong and capable, but strength felt more like armor than truth. She remembered sitting in the passenger seat. While someone else drove her life forward, she had handed over the wheel. A long time ago, because it felt easier than conflict, easier than disappointing anyone, but now with the quiet growing louder inside her, she began to wonder what her life might look like if she took the wheel back. At first, she did not act on those thoughts. She let them simmer. She watched them from the corner of her mind while folding laundry, while making dinner, while lying awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, and slowly what once felt like guilt started to feel like grief. Grief for the parts of herself she had ignored, grief for the voice she silenced to keep peace, grief for all the moments she had said yes when her body whispered no. The grief did not come with tears. At first, it came with distance. A distance from routines that no longer fit, from conversations that felt shallow, from relationships built on one-sided giving she still loved deeply. That part never left, but her love began to take a new shape. It became quieter, more discerning, more rooted in truth, and one morning she woke up and realized she no longer wanted to go back to the life she had before, not because it was all bad, but because she was no longer the woman who fit inside it. It was not a decision made in anger. It was not revenge. It was clarity, the kind that arrives only after you have sat with yourself in silence long enough to hear what your heart has been trying to say. She looked around her home and saw objects that once meant something, now collecting dust. She saw photos on the wall of moments that felt far away, not because of time, but because of who she was then, and in that stillness, she asked herself the question that would change everything. What would my life look like if I chose it for me, not for what others needed, not for what they expected, but for who I truly am? The answer did not arrive in words. It came in feeling, a wave of relief, a spark of fear, a sense of home. She knew she could not keep living from habit, from guilt, from obligation. She needed space. She needed silence. She needed herself, and so she started saying no. At first, the words felt foreign on her tongue, heavy with hesitation, but each time she said it, the sky opened a little more. She said no to gatherings that left her drained, no to explanation. Shout never changed anything, no to pretending everything was fine, and slowly she began saying yes, yes to mornings without plans, yes to books that made her feel seen, yes to quiet walks where her thoughts could breathe, yes to solitude, not as punishment, but as nourishment. The shift was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was a slow, steady return to a life that felt honest, and in that honesty, she began to feel something she had not felt in years. She felt herself, not the version shaped by titles and expectations, not the woman who belonged to everyone else, but the woman she had always been, and that woman was ready to begin again. 3 alone, not lonely. People did not understand when Eleanor chose not to date after the divorce. They meant well. When they offered to set her up with someone, they told her she should not waste time, that she deserved to be loved again, that there were good men out there. But what they did not see was that Eleanor was not searching for someone else. She was finally meeting herself after so many years of being spoken for. She was learning the sound of her own voice. The quiet of the house that once felt like absence began to feel like space, space to rest, to breathe, to become. She no longer rushed through mornings. She let the kettle whistle while she watched the birds outside her window. She took walks without a destination. She cooked meals for one, with care, not because anyone was watching, but because she was worth the effort. And in those quiet moments, she discovered something surprising. She did not feel lonely, not in the way people imagined. What she felt was presence, full, honest, steady presence with herself. There was no one to perform, for no one to please. She no longer had to soften her opinions or smile when she did not mean it. She did not have to ask permission to rest, or to dream, or to change. It was not that she had stopped believing in love. She simply stopped needing it to feel whole. She no longer confused attention with affection. She no longer mistook company for connection. She learned how to sit with herself in the evenings when the sun dipped low and the shadows grew long, and instead of reaching for distraction, she reached inward. Sometimes it brought up sadness. Memories of younger years, of versions of herself that tried too hard for too little sometimes. It brought up regret for the time she stayed too long. For the time she said yes when she should have walked away, but more often it brought up peace. The kind that does not shout, the kind that arrives like a tide, slow and sure and impossible to ignore. People still talked. They still asked when she was going to meet someone. They said things like, "You are too amazing to be alone." She smiled, not because it flattered her, but because she knew they were missing the point. She was not alone because no one wanted her. She was alone because she had finally stopped abandoning herself. That choice unsettled people. It made them uncomfortable. To see a woman who did not need to be needed, a woman who no longer made herself small to fit inside someone else's life, but she did not explain. She no longer felt the need. Her life did not require approval. Her joy was not up for debate. She found beauty in simplicity, a well-made bed, clean sheets that smelled like lavender, a walk under the evening sky, where the breeze whispered through the trees. She found rhythm in her own breathing. She did not chase intensity anymore. She craved depth, and depth could not be rushed. It had to be earned. She no longer feared her own company. She welcomed it. She began journaling again, not to solve anything, but to hear herself think. She began painting just to see color come to life. She filled her home with plants, books, warm light, and stillness. And in that stillness, she realized she had never been empty, only overextended, only overlooked. Now she saw herself clearly, fully, not through the eyes of others, but through her own, and what she saw was not a woman past her time, not a woman forgotten or waiting. What she saw was someone returning. Someone alive, someone whole, not in spite of her solitude, but because of it, for the peace they never talk about. There's a kind of peace that no one teaches you about. It does not arrive through success or applause or being chosen by someone else. It comes quietly after the storm, when you have nothing left to prove and nothing left to chase. Ella Lehner found that peace not in a perfect life, but in an honest one. She stopped pretending to enjoy things that drained her. She stopped going to dinners where she had to fake laughter. She stopped returning calls from people who only reached out when they needed something. It was not that she became unkind, it was that she became clear. She had spent too many years translating her needs into softer language so others would not feel uncomfortable. Now she spoke simply, gently, but without apology. Her boundaries were no longer walls, they were doors. She opened with intention. She no longer waited for someone else to give her permission to rest, to breathe, to exist. As she was, that shift did not come easy. It came with grief, because letting go of old roles meant letting go of old versions of herself, and sometimes that meant facing the fear that, without those roles, she might be nothing. But she was not nothing. She was becoming someone who could love without losing herself. Becoming someone who could be generous without going empty. Becoming someone who could stand in her truth. Even if it meant standing alone, the quiet did not scare her anymore. It became her ally. It gave her time to reflect, to soften, to heal. In the mornings, she sat with her tea and let her thoughts move like clouds across a wide-open sky. Some days were heavy with memory. Some were light with laughter. All were hers. She did not fill her days to avoid silence. She learned to let the silence hold her in that space. She discovered joy that was not loud, but lasting. She laughed more easily. Not because life was perfect, but because she had made peace with its imperfections. She cried too. But the tears were not from weakness. They were from release, from gratitude, from finally feeling safe. Inside her own skin, there were still lonely moments, but they were different now. They did not carry shame. They carried truth, because even in loneliness, she did not feel lost. She knew where she was home, not in a place, but in herself. People still misunderstood her choice. They thought she had given up on love, but Eleanor had not given up. She had grown up. She no longer believed that love meant losing parts of yourself to keep someone else close. She no longer believed that being chosen was the same as being cherished. She wanted something different now, something deeper, a love that did not start with filling a void, but with sharing fullness. And until that kind of love came, she was not waiting. She was living fully, freely, quietly. She no longer looked at her life in terms of what was missing. She looked at it in terms of what was true. Her days were not empty. They were intentional. Time was not being filled. It was being honored, and that was enough, more than enough. She was not bitter. She was wise. She had tasted chaos, and now she craved calm. She had lived for others, and now she was learning to live with herself. Not for show, not for validation, just for the simple, sacred fact that she is still here, still breathing. Still growing. The world did not slow down for her, but she had learned to slow herself, and in that stillness, she found everything she had been missing, not outside, but within. The woman they whisper about, they still talked about her, sometimes in quiet voices over coffee, sometimes in passing comments with raised eyebrows and knowing glances. She must be lonely, they said. Maybe she is too proud, too hard to please, to set in her ways. They called her independent, like it was both a compliment and a warning. They called her private, like it was suspicious. Some even said she gave up, but Eleanor did not hear their voices the same way anymore. What once pierced now passed through. She no longer carried the weight of their assumptions, because she knew the truth of her life, and it was far richer than what others imagined from a distance. She knew what it took to build a life on her own terms, not from spite or arrogance, but from awareness. She had lived long enough to know what did not work. She had stayed too long in rooms that dimmed her light. She had said yes out of fear and no out of exhaustion. She had lost parts of herself in the name of love, in the name of peace, in the name of family, and still she rose, not with defiance, but with grace. Quiet, steady, lasting grace. Her life was not loud, but it was full. She had replaced noise with meaning. She had traded approval for peace. She no longer measured her worth by how wanted she was by others. She measured it by how true she was to herself. That kind of self-respect is rare, and it is unsettling to those who are not ready for it. Eleanor did not walk with urgency anymore. She walked with rhythm, with choice, with patience. She no longer rushed into conversations or explained herself to people who had already decided who she was. She let silence do the heavy lifting, and in that silence, she became known to herself in ways no relationship had ever made possible. Her home reflected that same clarity. It was not grand, but it was hers. Every corner spoke of care and intention. The books on the table were the ones she loved, not the ones she thought would impress. The kitchen was simple, but full of warmth. The light came in through open windows and danced on the floor in the afternoon. Sometimes she played music, sometimes she let the breeze speak instead. Her days were not planned to impress. They were designed to nourish. A slow morning with coffee, a walk in the garden, a call with an old friend who truly listened, a meal cooked with her own hands. For what/mice we say, no one but herself, and in those moments she felt a kind of joy that cannot be bought or borrowed. A joy born from living in alignment with who she is. She did not deny the past. She honored it, even the mistakes, even the heartbreaks, because they had all shaped her, but they did not define her. What defined her now was how she carried herself through the present, with calm, with conviction, with quiet power. She no longer needed to be saved. She did not want to be worshipped. She wanted to be seen fully, not as someone to fix or possess, but as someone to meet and walk beside. That kind of desire is not common. It cannot be faked. It requires emotional maturity and presence, and the truth is not everyone is ready for that. Eleanor knew that. And still, she waited, not passively, not longingly, but patiently, because she understood Something most people spend their whole lives trying to learn, that love is not about filling what is missing. It is about celebrating what is already whole and what. It is already whole and what. She was whole. She had built that wholeness piece by piece from the broken shards of earlier years. She had stitched herself together not to appear perfect, but to feel real. Her story was not tidy, but it was true, and she would not trade that truth for comfort or approval or companionship that cost her authenticity. She had learned the difference between being chosen and being respected, between being seen and being used, between being in love and being in need. She wanted the kind of connection that felt like quiet understanding, not constant performance, the kind that felt like still water, not crashing waves. And until that came, she was not afraid to walk alone, not because she had hardened, but because she had softened in the right places. The kind of softness that comes from knowing your worth, the kind of softness that cannot be shaken by silence or by solitude, because Eleanor knew now that she was not waiting to be loved. She was already loving herself with the tenderness and honesty she once gave to everyone else, and that love was enough, more than enough. The kind of enough that radiates even when no one is watching, the kind of enough that settles into your bones and stays. That kind of love does not arrive with flowers or fireworks. It arrives quietly and says, I am here and I am not leaving. And when it finally comes from another soul, it will not complete her. It will accompany her, not to fix, or to rescue, or to consume, but to honor, to match, to rise together. And until that day comes, she will continue as she is, whole-rooted, unapologetically herself. Coming home to herself, Eleanor no longer counted her life in milestones, not in anniversaries or roles or the expectations she once tried to meet. She measured her days in peace, in moments when she felt herself fully present, in the steady rhythm of breath that asked for nothing but awareness. Her story was not one of isolation. It expies a story of return to a woman who had always been there, quietly waiting beneath the noise, beneath the people-pleasing, beneath the decades of being what others needed her to be. She came back to herself, not with fanfare but with gentleness. She held her own hand through the moments of doubt. She looked into the mirror and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because she had stopped abandoning herself. There is a certain beauty that only appears with age, a kind of grace that does not try to be anything other than real. Eleanor carried that beauty now, not on her skin, but in her spirit, not in her posture, but in her presence. She did not need to prove her worth. She embodied it. She did not seek attention. She commanded quiet respect. Her life was not loud, but it was powerful. It echoed with the strength of someone who had known heartbreak and still chose to love, someone who had been ignored and still chose to listen, someone who had once begged to be seen and now stood in the light of her own knowing. That is not loneliness. That is awakening. That is wholeness, and that is enough. Eleanor never stopped believing in connection. She simply stopped believing that she had to lose herself to have it. She no longer looked outward for answers. She looked inward for truth. She walked through her days not with urgency, but with awareness, not chasing, not resisting, just allowing. And in that quiet allowing, she discovered something priceless, a sense of home within herself, the kind of home no one can give and no one can take away, the kind of home built slowly, patiently, through honesty and self-respect. And from that place she now lives, not waiting to be chosen, not proving she is worthy, but knowing she already is.